Morning, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of these webinar series. I'm joined by, and they don't necessarily have to show themselves, but Joel Terensky and Jason Wines are with me here today, and they'll be answering all the questions that you guys post. There they are. So they'll be responding to all the questions that you guys submit. And again, we're working on getting these recordings of these past webinars up to the Christie Digital YouTube page. So they are there. I believe the first one is up now from Monday for the general overview of the hardware. So you can catch that on YouTube. I'll forward out links. We're getting our processes going and make sure that we're gonna have a schedule for the next couple of weeks of all the different topics that are gonna be coming up. That should get posted either late today or first thing Monday. But you can look back on the Facebook and LinkedIn user groups for the one that's scheduled for Monday. Okay, I'll talk about that a little bit before I hang up today. So today we are going to talk about command keys. This is a topic that normally in my training class, which is a 2 to 3 day class, usually I don't touch on until almost the end of the first day or the beginning of the second day, because there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple people in the list here that think I might be putting the cart before the horse, but they're in the interest of keeping people engaged and getting them up to speed. I wanted to kind of jump right into the command keys. A command key in Spyder is a preset for, and there's really no other way to kind of put that, right? So I am going to temporarily hide that. Now, let's get that off the screen. So the past two webinars, we talked about the hardware. Yesterday, on Wednesday, we talked about how to create and configure your Spyder to have the destinations and the pixel spaces all configured and how you set the resolutions. And now we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of fast forward through this. So the examples that I'll be showing you today are with a completely configured Spyder with sources and outputs and everything already done. We'll be going over that process, some of these other finer points later on. But let me go ahead and close this. And then let's bring this back up again. So command keys. I guess I should open up, bear with me. Gonna go ahead and open up Spyder Studio here as well, and I'll move it out of the way for a second. But command keys are how, like I said, are presets. There are, if you think about it, when we look at the studio here, we have pixel spaces. To the left over here, we have sources. And down in the system patch here on the bottom right, which we'll be having another webinar altogether on, this is where all the output properties, pixel space properties, and layer properties can be referenced. When you click on one, it'll basically show it you here in the property panel. But so a command key is a macro for applying properties to layers. I usually call it, I have an acronym I use that's called SLIC, because you have to think about four things whenever you create a command key. You have to think about the source you want to put on the screen. You have to think about which layer you want to use, because our layers have a Z order, meaning 1 is on the bottom, 24 would be on the top, and if they overlap, obviously the higher number is going to be over the top. So that's something to think about as well. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail. So source, which layer, which pixel space it's going to be loaded to, and what keyframes are going to be applied. And again, keyframes is another topic we're going to be talking about, but this is we'll kind of touch on them lightly in this webinar. But source, pixel space, I'm sorry, source, layer, pixel space, and keyframe. And I use the S, L, and then the I in the pixel space, and then layer. Now, I can't take credit for SLIC, but that's the kind of checklist I use for every time I create a command key. So let me toggle back to this PowerPoint. So command keys, you'll see that we have a grid that I've got a representation here of. So the grid is directly to the right of the simulator over here, and it's tabbed in this panel along with function keys. If I click on these, it's very faint, but you can see that there are little squares that highlight, right? That grid determines how many command keys you can see or how many presets you can see at one time. So it's important to know how many you want to see. Now, these panels can be undocked. You can move them and extend them to another monitor and make it much bigger. But if I were to go to the tools menu right over here, go down to options, there is a menu over here called grid options, and you'll see function key grid, scripting grid, and command key grid. Now, there's a couple of checkboxes over here under the command key grid that I'm going to turn off temporarily, okay? But that's basically saying for, if I have a grid size of an 8x4, it's going to allow me to create 4 rows of 8 of command keys. So if I were to change the number of these to 9, 10, it's going to change my grid size. I could make this a 10x10 and have 100 command keys in there, but you'll see very quickly that's not practical because the panel is so small that they all just get scrunched in there. So you really want to set your grid size to where it's usable. What's nice is that there's a page number right here. You can simply go right below that and right click and add a page. So you can have multiple pages. I'm going to call this maybe rehearsals, right? And now you can create command keys to this panel. Excuse me. So once I have my grid set, let me toggle back to here. There are 2 types of command keys. So there's also a couple of ways to build command keys. One way is to simply take your sources from the source list over here, drag them onto the pixel space, okay, resize and define, and also even right click and define what pixel space they're loaded to. So I'll load this one directly to the main screen. When I start moving the layer around, I'm really defining its position and its size, and that is a keyframe value, again, which we'll talk about in another webcast. But I basically determine where I want the source and which sources I want where. Okay, let me just go ahead and pop these into somewhere. You can use the alignment tools up here at the top to quickly fill a source into a specific pixel space. Sorry. Let me load that one into house right and then fill the screen. I'll load this one into main screen and we'll just fill the height on this one. So once I have a look, what I've done is I've said, okay, I want this source in that pixel space. I want it this on this particular layer, and I want it to be sized and positioned in this area. So I've talked, again, source, layer, pixel space, keyframe. Those 4 things are the 4 most important things you want to think about when you're creating command keys. Once it's built, once the look is created in the simulator, okay, then I would simply go over to the command key grid, and wherever I click, I mean, you'll see there's little positions in there. If I right click, I get the option to create a command key, and it's saying add from either empty, screens, preview, or program. So it really kind of depends on where you built the look, whether you built it in program or you built it in preview. Do you want to add from preview? If you built the look in preview, you'd say add from preview. If you built the look in program, like I just did, I would say add from program. Add from empty creates an empty command key, right? Which leads me to believe we need to create an empty one as well. So before I do that, I'm just going to call this one, I'm going to go right click, add empty, and I'm going to call this one clear all. Okay. And what it's done is it created a command key. And what this will do is, and the one thing you have to remember is that the command key is it's basically literally tied to the script window, which is right below the simulator. So everything you see down here. So when I click on a command key, it's showing me the contents of that particular command key or preset, okay? If I create an empty command key, it's gonna say, all right, this command key is empty, clear all layers off the screen. There shouldn't be any layers on the screen. So notice the symbol in the top right corner of that command key. There are 2 types, relative versus absolute. This is considered an absolute command key. So this is there's a checkbox in that tools menu that I unchecked. it defines whether it's going to be an absolute or relative. So right there, you see that little, I don't know if you can see that symbol. Maybe I'll zoom in on it during the recording. But that looks like a little, I always joke, it's a Star Trek little communicator thing. But what that represents, it's absolute. It says absolutely only show this, okay? Whatever preset, whatever's on the screen, and that's what you save. If it's an absolute command key, it will say, okay, I'm going to put these items up. Anything that's not programmed into this particular command key is coming off the screen, okay? So a clear all command key that is empty will basically take since there are no elements in my script window, it will mix everything off the screen, okay? So once I've done that, let's start building a look, okay? So I'll take a source, put this one here, I'll drag it on, it puts it on the layer I want, or on layer 1. I can move it to a pixel space. I'll resize it. So I'm saying source right here, layer, when I drop it on there, it puts it on the next available layer, the next available upstream layer, which is 2. Then when I define the pixel space, I'll say the main screen, and then I can define the keyframe, which will be the size and position. I'll take one more and put it over here on house right. Resize, there we go. So I've built a look in the simulator, and now I want to save it. So again, I come back over here and I'm going to go over to the next position. So this you can see right here, the number 1 position. I'm going to go over here to the number 2 position. Add from program. We'll call this look 1. Okay. Now, before I start going into the program preview and all this stuff, one thing to keep in mind, if I were just to simply click on the upper portion of this command key here, you'll see that it basically gives me properties, and that's right. It doesn't necessarily execute the command key. The only way to execute the command key is by hitting either PVW or PGM. That is highlighted, or that is programmed. When I click, let's clear this real quick. If I hit preview, it is highlighted to take the Q line, the red line you see here in the script window, to the Q number 0, which is labeled preview, okay? So preview button right here, hard-coded to go to Q0. Program button is hard-coded to take the Q line to Q1. So when I click program here, you're going to see this Q line pop down and strike through these elements down here below. So when I go program, boom, it mixes those layers up to the screen. Okay. So it's important to understand those 2 buttons. For one, I constantly in training, I'm telling people, make sure you click program or preview, because if you click up here, it's not going to do anything, So if I clear, that's saying clear all layers off the screen. Now, let's say I create a different look. Maybe we'll put 2 layers on this main screen down here. I'll just quickly resize some of these things here, just get them centered where I want them, and I'll create another look. Now, I'll go ahead and clear. Now, this is a great way to show why an absolute command key, or how an absolute command key behaves. So if I preview look 1 right here, I'm going to make this a little wider so we can see these names. Look 1, take it to preview, takes those to the screen, to the preview area. I hit program, they dissolve onto the screen. Now, for all you live event folks out there, which I would imagine that's the bulk of the people watching this, the idea is that you want to be able to preview the next look before it actually goes to the screen. Now, when I go to look 2 and hit preview, notice that all those things come off the screen and it loads it into preview. Because both of those command keys, because that particular one is absolute, it's saying absolutely only take these 2 items to preview. Anything else that's up on either in program or in preview, mix off completely. Absolutely only show this, okay? This method of programming is more common in fixed installs where they are looking at a Crestron or an AMX panel and they just want to take a look to the wall and not worry about what's on there or what's going to be. They don't want anything residual left on the wall. So it's very important to understand that in a live event scenario, you need the ability to preview and take without affecting other layers. So we're taking baby steps towards that, okay? Now, another very important thing to remember is that if I just hit program, I can take this directly to the screen. Now, when that command key is live, okay, now currently you can see both the preview and program lights are on, yellow and red, and you'll see yellow and red referenced everywhere. Over here in the source list, you'll see it down here in the script window. That's referencing and saying that this particular item is either in program or in preview. It's being used in one of those places. But I'm also in what we call a live edit mode, meaning if I were to go in while this command key was live and start moving things, right? Moving them around, and I clear and then go and relaunch, it remembered all of those things because it's constantly editing the command key when it's live. So, important fact to remember: if you don't want to edit your command key, don't touch anything in the simulator. So what I'll do is quickly just go and correct these real quick while it's live. I'll just go say, all right, I want that back over there. I want this back down here, and I want it centered, and I want this one back in its pixel space. And when I relaunch it, you'll see it'll correct the preview layers as well. So if you do want to play with something like this, there's a couple ways you can do this, a couple ways I would suggest you do this. One is either hit the button directly above up here where it says disconnect, or directly over here in the simulator it says disconnect layers. These two buttons do the same thing. They were just duplicated at some point in the GUI. But what they do is when I click this, you'll see that the command key red and yellow lights will go clear again, right? So now I can go in here and move this layer, move this layer, move this layer. But when I go back to launch it again, sorry, they all fly back, okay? Because I took myself out of the edit mode, okay? Another way to do that is there's a button right up here at the top that says live updates enabled. So notice there's a little unlock button there. That means just what I said. If you adjust anything while this command key is live, it will be automatically recorded in that command key. So if you disable this function, okay, now notice it's red and there's a lock button. If I were to come in here and start making changes to these keyframes, when I go back to launch the command key, they go back, okay? Same if I were to, I'll disconnect and let's just bring a different source in here like this. And then I create another one, call this one look 3. I can create new command keys, but once I create them, I can no longer edit their keyframes in here. So if I were to go and launch this and then try to adjust it, move it around, it's going to go back to their original looks, okay? So it's important to understand that live update mode. Now, the live updates button up here disabled, this is good for, again, fixed installs, right? Where they're going to come and commission the system, they're going to program it all, and then at that point, it's, executives just triggering looks based on a touch panel, and they don't want to have to worry about it. This way, when we go to commission it, we could program everything, get it all queued up with their control system, and then that way if some technician stumbles across our software and starts playing with the looks and says, look, I can move layers around and do all this stuff, they don't edit and change all the presets that we set up initially, okay? Now, in a live event scenario, you will never have that button on, at least, I'm sure there are probably very specific instances where you might disable that function in a lot, in any circumstance, but it's very rare. Okay, so moving on from there, let's go ahead and clear the screen here. Now, the first look is where I'm going to try something a little more basic here. So let's just take a single source, put it on the screen. Okay, I'll load it to the main screen, we'll center it, and I'm going to call this Q1. Okay, and then I'm going to clear, and I'm going to use, let's do this. Let's take a different source, use this, let's take this one, and kind of do the same thing. We'll move it to the right pixel space, I'll center it, I'll create another one and call it Q2. Okay, 2 command keys using the same layer. Okay, both command keys are absolute. Now, I'll clear, I'll preview, I'll take. Now, again, I go over here to preview, boom, it mixes that layer off. Why? Number one, it's absolute, and two, I use the same layer, okay? Now, how can I get around that? Close that little pop-up. I'll clear this. What I'm gonna do real quick is I'm gonna convert these two command keys to the other type, meaning the relative command key, right? So if I can do that one of two ways. I can either right-click on the command key and say make relative, and that's just like a toggle to go back and forth, or I can select it, go to the property panel over here, drop down the list, and make it relative. And you'll see that it gets a different kind of icon, okay? It gets a little blue square. So I'm gonna make both of these relative, okay? Now, you know what I need to do? I just realized I forgot to do something. Q2, I'm gonna change which layer that command key gets triggered to. I'm gonna say layer 2, okay? So I'm gonna clear, and I'll explain that script window later in a minute. So now, let me double back there, right? This is the beauty about recordings. I can go out and cut all this stuff out, but you get to see it live in action. Me sweating right here. All right, so first one, preview. Layer 1, take it to program, try to preview the other one on a different layer, boom, comes down to preview because it's absolute, right? That was where I was going with that. So how do we get around that? I'll clear this, I'll convert them to relative. Now watch what happens. I preview this one, I take it, okay? Now watch what happens when I preview the next one. Boom, comes up, didn't affect the program layer, right? Because it didn't use this Q number 2 command key, doesn't use layer 1, okay? And that's why it didn't affect it, it didn't change it. So a relative command key only changes the items that are programmed in that said command key, right? So if Q2 doesn't use anything that's on the screen, isn't currently using anything on the screen, it's not going to affect anything on the screen. Now, when I take this up, notice it goes up, but there's a problem here, right? I'm using 2 individual layers, and if I were to hit the disconnect button up here real quick, I can move this out of the way, and you'll see that other layer is still there, okay? It's because Q2 doesn't use layer 1, so it doesn't change anything, it doesn't mix it off, okay? So I'm gonna clear this again, and I'm gonna do something. I'll go ahead and load Q1, and I'm gonna add a small item here called an off element. Okay, just by right-clicking on the underneath the layer. So, all right, see, I told you this is gonna be there's a lot of factors involved here. So if we look at the script window, you'll see at the top of the script window, I have basically 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, all the way to 24. Those are my 24 layers in my system, okay? And you can see what source currently gets loaded and whether or not it's live or not. Down here is the queue. So Q0 is preview, 1 is program, you'll see 2, and then in another webinar, we'll talk about scripting, where you can do an entire sequence in a command key. So what I did on this first Q1 here, this command key, I went and put an off element, okay, to manually, no matter what, mix that layer off the screen. An off element says, okay, this is my insurance that whenever I go to this layer is going to get mixed off the screen regardless if it's being used or not. You can actually take the right side of that one and drag it all the way across to ensure that none of the layers will ever come on the screen, okay? Now, what I'm also going to do is clear this, and I'm going to go to my other one, and I'm going to put an off element for layer 1, right? And I'll just to be consistent, I'll just drag it across over here. So I've got one here and then another one going across. Now watch, when I clear, preview, takes the source up, program, takes it all the way up to the program area. Now if I hit preview on the next one, it takes layer 1 out of preview. Notice there's no longer a yellow dot over there. And when I hit program, the queue line will jump down, execute those off elements, and mix on my layer. Boom, and now I'm not using that layer. Now I could go back this way, load the other one, clears the preview layer, takes it up, okay? So we're taking baby steps here, right? So any of you hardcore Spyder ops, you're already saying, when is he gonna get to the mixers? This is where we get to the mixers, okay? So that is a very challenging way to handle for layer management. I should have prefaced this entire webinar saying that you have to be organized. You have to allocate layers to different pixel spaces. And we'll have a, we're talking about adding some panelists to future webinars for best practices, for live events, for fixed installs and things like that. So we'll get that too. But with any product that you're going to be using, you have to be organized. One of the beauties of Spyder is that you can put any layer anywhere at any time, regardless of its resolution. Okay, that's great. But if you're not organized, layers are going to be flying all over the place. I tell people when they come through training that my goal is for you to build a show and not be surprised about how anything transitions or moves, right? Because that's the idea, is to get organized. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, if I were to clear this, so when we look down on the script window down here, this little block that you see for this first command key, that's called a source element, okay? That, if you click on it, it has some options, okay? So it has which source, right? I could drop down the list, change this to a different source, and when I relaunch that command key, it will now carry over the same keyframe and everything else, and now it just simply replaced the source. If size and location, I have this currently loaded to, you'll see pixel space, layer, start queue, and queue length. If I don't want that to become on a layer one, maybe I want it to come on a different layer, I could drop it down and pick a different layer. I could change the pixel space, right, that it gets loaded to. So it's important to understand where this element resides in the script window and what pixel space it's actually being loaded to. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to delete these two command keys real quick, okay? And I'm going to show you another way to create a command key. So before we populated the simulator, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen up here, at the camera, we dragged our source, we determined what layer we wanted in there, we loaded it to the correct pixel space, and we adjusted the position and size and put it, if you want to put borders or drop shadows, again, we'll touch on all of that in future webinars. Then we created the command key. So we then took a snapshot, and what that does is it records everything. Okay, it looks at what layer, what source, what pixel space, what keyframe, what border, shadow, drop shadow, transparency, any of that stuff, and then records all that in the preset or in the command key. Command key remembers all. Now we're going to create a command key a different way. What we're going to start with, and I'll delete these up here as well. We're going to start with our clear command key, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right next to it. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say add empty. Okay, and I'm going to call this look one again. So, and I'm also going to convert this to a relative command key as well. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and launch it. Okay, notice it turns red for a second, but then that red goes away because there are no elements in the script window. So now, how do I define what sources I want loaded into this command key? Well, human nature would say, take the source, drag it into the simulator, define all that stuff. Well, that was good before we created the command key. Now we've created the command key, so we define those parameters a little bit differently now. We define them in the script window. So if I want a source to be loaded to this command key, I have to drag it from the source list. I'm literally going to take it from here, drag it down, and I'm going to drop it on the program queue under the layer I want it to appear on. Okay, so I'm going to drop it right here underneath layer one, right at the program, and just drop it. Of course, that's what it likes. Right there, boom. And notice it populates that with that source element. So now what I can do is select it and immediately go right over here, say sorry, I apologize. Instead of going to the property panel yet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on that element, and it gives us a bunch of other options right here. So instead of leaving it as a source element, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert it to what we call a mixer. Okay. And notice now that element spans across two layers, layers 1 and 2. Okay. So, and now you're going to see the benefits of this and the other things that you have to think about when using mixers. So now what I could do is on that mixer, it doesn't really, whenever you introduce a new element to the script window, it will say, okay, I'm going to load this. So if I immediately go start to load the command key, it's going to put it in the default pixel space, which is usually the first one you create. So it put it right up there because it can't read your mind. You need to tell it where you want it to load. So what you can do is by clicking on that element, go over to size and location and hit the pixel space menu and drop it down and tell it where you want it to go. I want it to load to the main screen, or I want it to go to D1 or to house right. And notice it's just simply mixing off and mixing back on again in the correct space. Well, let's say I want that in the main screen. So once it's there, I've defined the pixel space now. Now I would go over and actually create and set the keyframe value. So you're basically just adjusting the layer so aesthetically it looks like what you want it to on the screen. Now again, I'm technically editing this command key. So if I click on the command key, it should update my preview layer. So what have I done here that's different from the previous one? It sounds like right now all I'm doing is burning 2 layers instead of 1, right? Well, here's the benefit of this. I'm going to go ahead and clear this. Let me just clear this real quick. I'm going to create another empty one. Call it look 2. And I'm going to make it relative as well. Go ahead and launch it. I'm going to take a different source, do the same thing, drag it into layer 1, convert it to a mixer, immediately go over to the property panel, define the pixel space I want it in, and then adjust the keyframe. Okay. Now I have 2 command keys, both using the same mixer. Okay. So if I clear, I can preview the first look, and notice what it does. Of those 2 layers of the mixer, it loads the first one and loads it into the preview area. When I hit program, it will take layer 1, dissolve it onto the program area, onto the screen, and load layer 2 into preview. Okay, so now I have layer 1 and layer 2. Okay, so I'm using 2 layers. Now, if I go to preview my next look, remember the behavior prior to this is it would mix everything off, one, because it was absolute, or if we had to insert all those off elements, that can get confusing. Now I can just hit preview on this command key, and since a relative command key only affects the layers in that particular preset, it only affected the preview layer. So what it did is it loaded that source, and notice my queue line shows that it's in preview. It's loading that source, and when I go to hit program on this, it will take layer 2 up to program and mix layer 1 down. Boom. Okay. Now I could go back here, preview the other source, take, and they dissolve. So what you're doing is you're basically saying, take the source to preview, then take it to program, loads up the preview layer, load my next source, dissolve. Load my next source, dissolve. And all those 2 things are going back and forth and just dissolving back and forth between each other. Okay. So live events, really, and you can ask anybody, half the people that are watching this right now are full of relative command keys using mixer elements and off elements. Okay, it's basically just a management of all of those things. And just keep in mind, I can only really scratch the surface in an hour, right? There is so many other organizational things that you have to take into consideration, but I wanted to give you the real kind of mechanics of how these command keys work. So let me toggle back to that PowerPoint slide here. A couple of different things. Now, so if I were to launch look 1, let's say I wanted to change that. Maybe I wanted this layer to go over to the left side. I want to edit it, so I'm already in live edit mode, so I can take this layer, resize it, I'll move it over here. Okay, so now when I launch this command key, that layer is going to be in that position. I'll clear, and look 2, I'll do this one in preview. Let's say I want this one to be big, but I want it over here on this side. Okay, so now when I clear, if I preview, boom, there's my first source, take, there it goes. When I preview my next one, boom, loads it into the next area. Now watch the transition as it goes, as it takes it to the screen. Takes layer 1 and morphs it to that position. And you're gonna see the crossfade and the movement. And we call that smooth go, okay? That's a smooth go transition, or it's a smooth go feature. That is defined, that movement or that setting is defined in the element itself. Okay, in the mixer element. So if I were to select I'm in look 2 here. I go down here to the mixer element. There's the size and location, the mixer option. So the default mixer option is morph. So it morphs from its original position and changes aspect ratio and crossfades the source, all based on where it's going, where it was, and where it's going to, based on what command key you're going. So if I were just to simply preview look 1 again and go back, it's going to crossfade back and forth. Now, without getting too much into the whole keyframe subject, if I were to say I wanted to change the duration in which it flew from one position to the other, well, that gets handled independently on each command key. So you can define that on each one. So let's say when it gets here, I want it to be there. So I would select the layer, and I get a bunch of stuff over here that we'll be covering in different menus. But under keyframe, you get position, meaning relative coordinate position. You get absolute coordinate positions. You get width and height. Okay, you can change those, and they're based on their aspect ratio. But then there's one in here for duration. The default duration is 60. So let's say when I go there, I want it to go at 10 frames. Okay, it's measured in frames. And if I clear this one, and I'll go to here, I'll launch this one, and I'll say I want this one to move at 150 frames, right? So it's going to move much slower. So bring it up here, preview, if I preview this one, watch how long the transition takes now, because that one has 150 frame duration. Okay, so that's going to take roughly, what is that, 2.5 seconds-ish. And if I preview the next one and go back to this one, this should move very quickly, because the keyframe for this preset is 10 frames. Moves very quickly. Slow, quick. Okay, so we're only working with one pip here in a single command key, okay, or a couple of command keys. The nice thing is that if you follow some basic rules and get organized, you can make it very simple, right? It doesn't have to be super complicated. Let me clear this out here. I feel like I've kind of rambled on for a bit. So you got smooth go, you got live edit, the disconnect function, the elements, the different types of elements. Okay. Now, so far we've seen just a regular source element, and we've seen a mixer element. There's another one in here called an input array. I'm just going to add an empty one here and just call it input array. And I'll leave it as absolute. If I were to take something like, I have these two Pandora, a 2-channel Pandora graphic where it would come out of a dual head, a dual server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag those into my preset, or I'm sorry, into my command key script window, and I'm going to convert that initial one to something called an input array. Okay. Now, an input array, if I select it and go to the property panels, size and location, an input array is designed for multi-channel graphics, right? It's designed for the Spyder to wait for these sources to load into these layers before it presents them onto the screen. So it can be any number of layers. I can just start adjusting the layer count, and it's going to tie all these layers together. Be cautious with this, but anything like say Pandora or any other media server, watch out, Coyote. There's a bunch of them out there. If it's a multi-channel graphic, so what I would do down here is I'd put PB Dual 1 into layer 1. It's kind of hard because they're kind of over on top of each other. And then I'll take PB Dual 2, drop it in there, and you'll see that little number change. So now layer 1 will have PB 1A. I'm sorry, PB Dual 1, and then layer 2 will have PB Dual 2. I'll go ahead and define. Okay. I'll define what pixel space. Let's make that to the main screen. And now it presents themselves. So remember, it's source to layer to pixel space to keyframe. That's the slick function I was talking about. You're choosing the source, you're picking which layer, you're defining the keyframe over in the property panel, then you're adjusting, you're defining the pixel space and then adjusting the keyframe in the simulator. So now I can take layer 2 and 1, and let's say this is meant to go full screen and butt up to that side, and this one is meant to go full screen and butt up to that side. Okay, so now we have my 2-channel graphic that's there. And when I clear this, if I go and use, say, layer 1 here, the purpose of this is for it to wait for the other layers to load before they bring them on the screen. So if I were to go directly to program, it's going to bring it down, bring them up together. Now, an example of how this would work if you were to use just source elements, let's try that. Let's go non-array, right? And I'm going to do PB1. Let's see here, PB1 and PB2. We'll define pixel spaces for these, main and main, and do the same thing. I'll just go ahead and set them up where you can full screen, snap to that side. Whoops, gotta do that one first. Here, there, and then this one will go full height and snap to the right. Now, the benefit of this is that if I have another command key, like this one, say this was just using a source element, right? This was just using one layer, layer 1. What would happen if I were to go directly to the non-array? Layer 2 comes up first, then it loads layer 1 because it has to switch the source for layer 1 to PB dual 1. Now, going back the other direction, if I go to this one and then use the input array, waits, brings them up together. So that's the benefit of the input array, is to wait for the other sources to all load into their respective layers and then generate them all up to the screen at the same time, okay? Now, I'm sure this is gonna generate a billion questions, and Joel and Jason are probably just feverishly typing away right now because there's so many other things that go into this. But again, this was meant to be kind of a high-level overview of command keys and how they work. Now, notice back over here to the grid. Notice the number in the upper left corner, okay? That number 1, if I were to move this, that's the position in the grid. So if I were to move it to a different area in the script or in the grid, notice it went to position number 2. That is called the registry ID. There's an ID number for that command key, so it can be recalled externally. Well, you can recall it either by that registry position, or every time you create a command key, it also creates what we call a script ID, which is a hard-coded number that never changes. Regardless of where I move this command key in the grid from 11 to 8 to 32 back up to 1, the ID number, the script ID number will never change, but the registry ID number can change. This is nice because there are a litany of third-party products out there that allow you to trigger the Spyder. And the most common external command, one of the most common one, is called recall script queue, which is how you recall a command key. You have the option to recall that command key either by its position in the grid right here, or its actual hard-coded number. And depending on how you work, or depending on how you structure your command keys, you may opt for either one. So things like the Stream Deck or the HRS control, they have a litany of buttons, AV presets. There's just so many of them, right? All of them have that functionality built in, as well as Widget Designer. Sorry, Widget Designer. All of them have that feature where you choose whether it's registry ID or script ID. So it's a really important function to remember when you're looking to trigger these items externally. Okay, and we're going to have a whole one of those topics for these webinars are external third-party devices that can do this. What else? I have to remind myself. All these command keys here, you'll see that you can have a custom button color. If you select one, you can come over here, enable the color, and then go in here and actually define what color you want it. I'll make this one black, right? And then I'll make this one. Did I not change that one? Oops, did I change the wrong one? There we go. And then this one is going to be, call it red, right? So you can color code them, you can move them around, group them together by color, any number of things, right? Let's see here. What to talk about without going down the rabbit hole, right? Let's see. Actually, Joel, are there any
Yeah, well, let's answer some questions about doing a hard cut. How do we do a hard cut?
So duration. Okay, so a hard cut is basically duration. Now I'm running this in offline mode, so the simulator doesn't always reflect the actual the true speed in which it's happening. When you're on the Spyder itself, you can actually see the behavior. So duration is set in multiple places that you have to consider. Okay, so first, where are all these duration settings, right? Okay, first one, the most obvious one is right here in the simulator. Okay, so I'm going to clear this off the screen, bring a source out here. Now, you saw me hitting some of these alignment tools up here. If I just snap to the left, snap to the right, everything is going at 60 frames per second. So it's going to take 1 second for that duration to happen. So that is 15 frames. And now I can go up, down, quick and fast. So there's one place that there's a duration setting. If I launch a command key and go to the element, sorry, phone should be muted. If I select that element, there are, you saw source options, we saw size and location, entrance and exit options, okay? These are how quickly is that element right here, is it going to dissolve into program and dissolve out of program, okay? So notice they're grayed out here in with 60 frames per second, but if I were to go to server frame configuration, there is a menu buried in here. You should be able to collapse those. Down here under scripting engine, okay? Enable elements global settings, meaning I can globally change all the entrance and exit durations from here. So if I wanted everything to be a cut, right, let's call it 1 frame. I would need to make sure that this is set to 1. Whoops, that's a minimum of 2, so you gotta be careful with that one. Sorry, so I'll make that 2. I'll go ahead and apply those. Say okay. Any apply in there, you would have to reboot the Spyder to make sure that was in effect. I would also have the that way. Now, when I look at this, you'll see instead of the 60 frames, it's automatically going to be 30 frames, right? And every time I have an element in here, this is kind of a loaded question about durations. All right, so you gotta bear with me. So the element here at the top of the element settings, there's something up here called override global settings. So if I want to override the 2 frame dissolve, I can override it right there by checking it and then manually enter those entrance and exit options as well. Okay, so last place to check duration is in the keyframe. Okay, again, that's another, it's kind of, again, it's a loaded question for another topic. But if I come over here and I select the layer, I go to the keyframe tab, there's my duration setting. So if I want that to be 2 frames, okay, just to match everything consistent. So you have to set it on the entrance and exit and the keyframe, okay? So I'll make a couple of them here. Let me just clear this, and I'll make a couple of very quick command keys here. We'll call this 1. We'll make it relative, make it this source. Sorry. Right here, we'll make sure that it's on the proper pixel space here. And then a nice thing you can do with command keys is you can quickly copy them. Hold down the control key, click and drag, and call this 2, and now I've made an exact copy of that. You can also right-click, copy, and then right-click, paste, okay? So I'll launch this one now, and I'll change the source in here. Do that real fast. And so now I need to go in and make sure that I set the keyframe settings here instead of 60 to 10, or I'm sorry, 2. And this one to 2. And I know I'm probably forgetting something here, bear with me. Let's make sure that is set, applied. I don't think I should have to set that, reset that. So now if I preview, take, preview, take, preview, take. So it's a combination, the duration settings are a combination of keyframe speed, keyframe duration, and entrance and exit options, right? As well as the global setting. When we post these videos back, the recordings, not on the first one, but on the second one, you'll see a lot of call outs, a lot of highlighting and zooming in and doing like that. I'll make sure that I edit all these here, and it'll be weird as I talk about it. But anyway, any other questions so far?
Yeah, Peter, what is, I have a question again. Where are we posting these videos?
That's in the works, right? So if you go here, tell you what, I will go out of here. We'll exit out of that. I'm going to open up my web browser, and let's go to the home. Let's go to YouTube. Oops. Okay. And I am going to search for Christie Digital Channel. Okay. Christie Digital right here. And we'll make sure we have a link there. And you're going to see videos that are a lot of the promotion stuff, but under channels, there is a Learn with Christie. Okay. And in there, we have those webinars. Okay. So you'll see them. Those are the Pandora, and they're getting mixed up, but we're going to try to separate them, right? Separate the Pandoras from the Spyders, so they're not all jumbled together. We should have separate channels for those, but they're going to be in this Christie Let's Learn, the YouTube channel, okay? We'll also, in the interim, go ahead and paste them, or we'll load them into our share file site as an alternative place to download them. So if you already have a login for that, by all means, you can get them from there as well. Anything else?
Show how you can enable and disable elements in a command key.
Enable or disable elements. Okay. That is an advanced question. I can almost pick who out of the list who asked it, but that's okay. So here you can actually go in and temporarily disable an element by right-clicking on the element, and you can say disable. It doesn't take it out of the actual preset or the command key, so it will still retain all of its information. But if I were to go and clear and then try to take this, notice there's nothing there to take anymore. But if there were other elements aligned with it, you can actually just temporarily remove that from the preset itself. Okay, so it's just simply a right click, enable or disable. Okay, but very easily implemented depending on what look you're trying to do. Does that make sense? I'll assume yes. Anything else?
Yeah, I think we just need to clarify that this is a Spyder Studio that's for the X80. I get a lot of questions about, are we seeing things that can be done that are agnostic between the two things?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. So keep this in mind. Remember, if you saw the previous one, and maybe you haven't, and I'm making an assumption that a lot of people are just kind of following us through for each one. The process for this is identical in X20, right? If I were to do it one for X20 and then one for X80, every webinar would be 3 hours long. So we're trying to keep them short and simple, relatively simple. But just take comfort in knowing that everything I just showed you here is completely doable in the X20. It just looks, the colors of the interface are just simply different. That's all. Like I said, the major difference between X20 and X80, other than all the resolution and connector types, the hardware stuff, as far as the GUI is concerned, just the new configuration manager is the major difference between the two. And then there are, we'll highlight some of the other features in future webinars of certain ones are available in X80, and then certain that are not available in X20. But what I just showed you, everything I just showed you, is completely it's the same process in X20 or in advanced. Anyone else?
So I'm going to add this one, Peter. It's
sure.
What does the first row in the script editor represent? I mean, if I go to preview, would it jump between position preview and program? Isn't the naming confusing, or can you explain this a little further?
Yes, it can be a little bit confusing. You have to think about the script window. So if I were to clear something here and just take that to preview. You have to think about this red line, okay? What's sitting on top of the, say this is your red line right here, whatever's on top of the red line, that's the queue you're in, right? So the element, and even if when we get into scripting, I'll show you how you can have, multiple queues here, right? And as you go down, it's saying what's above the red line, directly above the red line is what's in program. What's directly below the red line is in preview. That's what's coming next. So it's kind of a, I hate to say it is what it is kind of thing, is it can be a little confusing. But if I were just to go preview program with a relative command key, you can see that queue line jumping down, jumping up, jumping down, jumping up, going from one queue to the other. And these labels over here, that's a label, right? So even though Q0 is hard coded to the preview button, Q1 is hard coded to the program button, as you were to go down a script later on, you have to kind of mentally realize that preview should be, it's always preview here, program here, preview below. So it's just basically whatever's directly above or below the queue line is what's currently there and what's happening next. I don't have a better explanation other than we're going to have a scripting webinar that does some very basic stuff, and it might help clarify some of that as well. I see other questions. I'm looking at the question table here, and there's a lot of questions on stuff that we're going to be talking about in the future, like MST. What else? Yeah, multi-key, right? That's a new one in X80, is not in X20. Okay, boy, I'm getting called out on that one. Okay, so this takes a little bit of prep, and then we'll call it a day. So I'm going to create one. Make it relative, 2, make it relative, and 3, make it relative. So I'm going to launch this one, and we're going to say that's going to be a source there. Oops, I'm going to break my own rule here. That goes right there. Let's make that left. Bear with me, I just got to, whoa, that is not where I wanted it to go. Clear. Now I can do this. This one is going to be layer 2, main. And this one is going to be layer 3. House right, and we'll fill that screen. So these are 3 separate command keys, right? So I can initiate each one of them independently. Could I also put them all into one command key? Sure, right? But then they would all come together. Do I want to keep them 3 separate? Then I got to figure out how to trigger. What if I want to trigger all 3 of those or any combination of those separately or together, right? So the idea is that the multi-key, add multi-key, I'll call this multi, allows you, and notice it's a double relative icon, right? So these really have to be relative command keys. So what you can do is say, okay, I can then come over here, instead of just color and absolute versus relative, you've got command key lists, right? So now I can say, which command keys do I want to add to this? So I'll just say I want to create, I've got a couple of them, I misnamed some of these. I want to add that one. I want to add number 2, and I want to add number 3. Maybe just those 2. We'll start with that one. Now I can basically preview that one, and notice it puts those elements right in there and program. I'll clear, but it should bring in those elements together as if they were one command key. Then I could create a separate one, call it multi-2, whoops, miskeyed that one. This one is going to be just maybe 1 and 3, okay? So now I can preview that one, take that. Preview this one, take that. Now, trick with the multi-key, the last layer wins, okay? when it comes to this, that's why it has to be relative. If there's any kind of layer conflict, whatever the last command key in that list is, that's the one that's gonna trump all, right? So you just want to be cautious with that. It's just a way to gang up multiple relative command keys. Prior to being able to do this, you'd had to, if you had the console, the montage console, you'd have to hit 2 buttons at the same time. Now you've got all these third-party products out there that let you kind of gang them all up together. We just eventually just kind of put it in there. That's been in there quite a while, and I'm not absolutely positive if that's available on X20, but I'm pretty sure it's not. But other than that, so with that, go back, play, pause, rewind, rewatch. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up directly. Thanks to Jason and Joel for helping me answer the questions here. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. We'll talk soon.